everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories Podcast. Okay, well, we are back for part 2. Sorry we missed last week. We just had some things come up, but ready to tell the second part of Maria Barbella's story.
Yeah, I'm excited.
But before we dive into this episode, let's just recap our last episode. So we introduced Maria Barbella and her family. They came to America, and then she met Demencio Cataldo, who she ended up killing. And we discussed the first murder trial and how she was the first woman sentenced to die by electric chair in America. She had the Countess di Brazza come to her rescue, and a lot of the public supported her and put together quite the legal team for her. And she was actually granted a second trial due to testimony being left out and not enough evidence to support a first-degree murder charge. So where we kind of left off was Maria was waiting for this trial to begin. She had been in Sing Sing prison, but had been taken back to the county jail in New York known as the Tombs. And so while she was there, she would spend her time knitting, embroidering, and crocheting. And so the Countess would actually supply her all of these supplies that she would need to do these activities. And Maria would return the favor by making the Countess and her daughters little gifts. So she made a small bag for the Countess and gold colored silk belts for her daughters.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's how she killed her time waiting for her second trial to start. And it did start on November 16th, 1896, 11 months after her first trial. When her trial started and all the newspaper reporters got to see Maria again, they described her as a changed woman. One paper said, quote, "Now she has a much more intelligent expression."
Why? Because she can speak English?
Because she can speak English, exactly. That tells you how intelligent you are, I guess. So the first day of trial was actually just jury selection. And it was interesting because the papers, they would actually publish the name, age, and occupation of each potential juror.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That's a little scary.
I know. I don't like that at all. The papers, they would also publish what the potential jurors said when they were questioned. And one potential juror said that he did not think Italians were always truthful, and Maria's attorneys immediately dismissed him for good cause.
Yeah, I guess it got out of that quick.
Yep, he was like, I know how to get out of this one. And it actually took 2 days to select the jury, and there were no Italians on the jury this time as well. And now her defense went into the second trial using a new tactic. Her attorneys claimed that when she cut Demencio's throat, she was having a seizure, and they called this mental irresponsibility. The attorneys are kind of pointing out that because of this, she should be excused from the murders.
Interesting
angle. And her attorney said that when Demencio told Maria only a pig would marry you, that actually triggered a seizure in her. But Maria, she even told the court, quote, "Sometimes I feel a machine in my head and the pain is so great I cannot stand it." So they took it even further during the trial by attempting to prove that epilepsy ran in Maria's family. And they even found a witness who was not related to Maria to corroborate that epilepsy ran in the family. And this man, his name was Antonio, and he was actually from the same town as Maria and her family. So he knew him fairly well. And Antonio said that he knew Maria's grandfather and would see him have seizures in the street and attack people during these seizures. And he said that if her grandfather wasn't having a seizure, he was perfectly fine. Maria's attorney asked Antonio, were the acts of this girl's maternal grandfather, which you have seen, rational or irrational? And Antonio answered, "It seemed to me that his acts, when he had fits, were those of a man deprived of his reason." So I think what they're really trying to do here is to prove that when Maria has a seizure, she can't control herself. She has no idea what's happening, because that's also what's happened to her grandfather in the past.
Right. But isn't that funny that they had to go get a witness? What about her family? Just saying.
Yeah.
Well, my dad had
seizures just like Maria. Maybe they thought if the jury might not believe. Yeah, okay. They might. That could have been it. But Antonio, he also went on to claim that one of her uncles was a successful farmer in Italy until he went, quote, insane, and eventually had to be confined to an institution after trying to jump off of a large windmill. He also said that Maria's maternal grandmother died in a, quote, insane asylum. And he said that she was what they call in Italy a Ron talker. And so what that meant was she wasn't physically dangerous, but would go around saying things to people that were not quite right and frighten them. And so that's what they called her in Italy, was a Ron talker.
Wow. That's a funny way of wording it.
It is. Yeah. Like, you're a Ron talker. I kind of like it in a weird way. Now, going back to what you were just talking about, actually, Maria's mother, she did also take the stand and talked about how numerous people in her family suffer from convulsions or fits, what we would call seizures now. So they did have her take the stand, but maybe they felt like we still have to have an outsider take the stand.
Like you said, because family could be covering,
and the jury might not believe her. Right. So, and her mom also talked about how Maria suffered from fits while she slept and always had trouble sleeping. She said Maria would yell out random statements while she slept, like gato, 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 which means cat. And she also said that Maria would always complain about being dizzy and her brain turning. That's how Maria would put it. That sounds painful. So one interesting story Maria's mother told was how Maria and her sister Antonia got into a fight. And she couldn't remember exactly what they fought about, but she said that Maria got so upset. And I don't think this was a physical fight, just a verbal fight. But Maria got so upset that she tried to jump out the window. She tore at her clothes and was screaming so loudly. And then Maria just kind of fell asleep. And when she woke up, she remembered nothing of the incident. So there's definitely something going on. So now Maria, she also took the stand and she was first questioned by her attorneys. They asked her about her headaches and her seizures, then asked her about the first time that she met Demencio. And she said that she first saw him when she was walking down the street to go to work. And she said that Demencio would stare at her but not say anything to her at first. But after a couple of months of her passing by, he finally said hello to her. And her attorney went on to ask her, this question just kills me, but he asked her, were you a good girl before you met Cataldo? And Maria responded, yes, sir. And then her attorney asked her, honest? And she said, honest, I was. And that question,
why?
It doesn't matter.
No.
So maybe that's what they were going at, is like trying to show that she's a good girl. She's virtuous to a jury full of men.
Yeah, that's true.
They asked her if Demencio ever talked to her about marriage. And she told them, yes, every day that he would walk her to work. Then the attorneys went on to ask her about the razor. And she said she got the razor the morning of the killing because she actually planned to kill herself if Demencio refused again to marry her. So they're kind of, I think, establishing a motive for why she grabbed the razor. Then they asked her about the moment she killed Demencio, and she said, quote, I felt something in my head very hot and saw a flash of light. Then I don't know nothing else at all. And that kind of relates back to the story about her and her sister getting in a fight.
Right.
So.
Yeah, just kind of blacking out.
And her attorneys asked her what was the next thing that she could remember. And she said, the next thing I remember was my hand was bloody and I thought I was cut. So she definitely had a blackout moment there. Her attorneys then went on to ask her about her head and if she suffered from headaches. And she told them yes, and that, quote, sometimes I feel like a machine in my head, then I can't stand up. So she refers to that machine in her head a lot.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of like a pounding. And she told the attorneys that one day her head started hurting and she passed out and her mother found her on the floor and she said she remembered none of it. So definitely there's trying to establish, that the seizures cause her problems, but also that she has moments where she doesn't remember anything. And I think that they're trying to prove like she doesn't even remember cutting his throat.
Right.
Now, when the prosecuting attorneys interviewed Maria, they asked her why her testimony had changed since the first trial. Her attorneys would intervene and, object to it and try to prove Maria didn't speak English during the first trial and it was translated through a translator. So they're trying to say like her testimony hasn't really changed. It was a language barrier and there was a problem with the translator. So that kind of went on for quite a while in this second trial, trying to figure out why her testimony had changed. But
well, that makes sense. However, that translator worded it is what they went by.
And remember, we talked about how that translator was terrible.
Right.
He would not even be paying attention and then just throw something out there. So, and now a lot of witnesses who were in the bar that Maria killed Demencio in, they were called and Some said that Maria seemed to deliberately kill Demencio, and others said that she seemed to not know what she was doing. So that testimony like almost cancels each other out in a way. Right. And they also had a medical doctor testify that if Maria did have a seizure when she attacked Demencio, she may have not known what she was doing because, according to the doctor, epileptics were more or less insane. And now, about a year later after this trial, this doctor comes back and says, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that statement. That's not medically correct, but he said it during her trial. Yeah. So
that's when you're supposed to know what you're talking about.
Exactly. So to go along with proving that the seizures were the kind of the problem, she doesn't remember, and that this mental illness, their words not mine, goes back in Maria's family. Maria's attorneys, they actually worked tirelessly to recreate Maria's family tree. They actually put it in the paper. It's fascinating to read. They would list the names of her relatives, and under each person, they would add in little anecdotes like suffered from unsound sleep and bad dreams, or headaches, or one of her relatives underneath them, it said sad, fearful, and very religious. So I can't imagine the amount of work that it took to create this tree, because they wrote it out and
how they found all that out.
Probably just interviewing Maria's family and maybe that Antonio guy. And so, of course, the tree has Maria in it. And here's what it says about Maria. Began to speak later than the other children of the family. Feet weak up to 5 years. Headaches frequent since childhood, vertigo with or without headaches since childhood, epileptic convulsions from 2 months up to 3 years and occasionally after, one distinct epileptic attack with fall at 10, sleep always light, bad dreams often, abnormal sensory and motor, constant tremors, character very mild, very religious, forgetful, never liked, and would not learn dancing. Now, Mom and I are having a little bit of trouble reading the newspaper article. We can't decide if it says learn or dern dancing, but we're going to go with learn dancing. Oh, and this last part, low forehead, absence of all tickling sensation. So that's what it said about Maria and her family tree.
Wow.
That'd be great to have published in the paper for all to read about you and your family. Yeah. So the New York Journal is actually the paper that published the tree. And the headline read, "Epilepsy to be Maria's defense, descended from a race of drunkards and chronic hysterical persons." Holy smokes. Wow. Like, that's not something you frame and put on the wall at your house, like underneath your family
all of
crest.
A sudden it's coming up this way now.
Exactly. Like you have your family crest and then this framed. It's like, oh, geez. So, but the papers, they were relentless because once again, even during this trial, they went after Maria's looks and tried to connect her looks to her intelligence and criminality. And
measuring her head and
comparing it to that one lady. This time, though, the New York Journal, they published an article on November 20th, 1896, discussing Maria's hands and ears. And they even had an artist draw her hands and ears so that you could see it. And we'll post this on our social media. But so the article, it claims that the lobe of the ear is the best way to tell how much of a criminal someone is. And according to the article, Maria's earlobe is, quote, well developed and looks perfectly natural. So there's a win for Maria. Like finally the newspapers are throwing her a bone there. Now, when they talked about Maria's hands, they said, Maria's hand is the normal hand of a poor, ignorant countrywoman. It is a rough and badly shaped, but it is not the hand of a criminal. So... So the article, it did go on to sum up Maria as a whole, and it said, Maria Barberi cannot be called either a degenerate or a habitual criminal. She is an ignorant woman of an ignorant class. Her ancestors were hardworking, uncultured peasants. They knew nothing beyond what they saw around them.
Wow, that says a lot about how they looked at the Italian.
It's like if you're trying to help her out here and like, hey, she's not a criminal. People, leave her alone. Do you have to throw in all the other stuff too?
That's deep. That shows you how they really looked at Italians.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. They're not just talking about Maria. They're talking about her whole race.
That's just how those... Italians are
ignorant, uncultured peasants. They don't know nothing. Them and their earlobes. So So during this trial, the arresting officer, Officer O'Rourke, who we talked about last time, he testified and was questioned about his interview with Maria. Now, I was reading an article published in the New York Journal, and they talked about how O'Rourke was actually fluent in Italian. And they questioned this because he's an Irish man and like they didn't believe him. And so he was able to prove this to them by speaking Italian in the courtroom. They did have some translators there, and the translator gave the thumbs up and was like, yep, he's good. He's speaking Italian. So...
Oh, wow.
And then there was the question of dialects got brought up. O'Rourke was like, I don't know, I just speak Italian. And he didn't understand the dialects. And he's like, and Marie understood me. So I don't know, take it with a grain of salt, I guess, whether or not she
he
truly...
was Irish. Maybe his mom was Italian.
Maybe. Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, that could have been it. Another difference in the second trial was that testimony about Demencio was allowed in. And so Maria's attorney said in his opening statement, quote, "We will produce a witness who will tell you under oath that Demencio Cataldo told him that he drugged this poor Maria and dishonored her while she was under the stupefying influence of the potion."
Oh, good.
Talk about a powerful statement.
Right.
I'm glad that this was allowed in, and I'm glad that her attorney said what he did because the jurors needed to hear that. So the trial, it actually lasted for 17 days, and it ended on December 10th, 1896. And the jury started deliberating the next day on December 11th. And after meeting for 40 minutes, the jury came back and found her not guilty.
Oh, wow.
This is about the exact same time that the jury took the first time.
Yeah. After 17 days, and it only took them
40 minutes.
So they did their job.
They did their job. That countess, she really did put together the dream team for them. So the papers reported that most everyone in the courtroom was pleased. Maria's mother, she threw her arms around Maria's neck, and Maria was said to just have a big smile on her face. And so Maria, she got up and she shook the hands of each juror. She hugged her attorneys, and then her and her mother left the courtroom together. So the next day, the countess, she actually met with Maria and congratulated her on being free and asked Maria, how she was doing and if her family needed anything. And the countess, she had actually been in Italy for a few weeks, and she brought Maria a gift, and it was a rosary that was blessed by the Pope.
Oh,
how cool is that? So after her release from, prison and the trial was over, she had a lot of publicity around her. So there were plays being produced again about her. That happened in the first episode too. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, they had more plays being produced, and she was offered, I don't know what museum it was, but somebody from a museum in New York came to her and offered her $35 a week to appear in their museum. And that's $1,300 today.
Wow. In a museum?
In a museum, like put her up like an attraction kind of thing. So I think there was just so much publicity around this whole trial and this incident that they knew they could make a lot of money off of it. But Maria ultimately declined and said that she doesn't want people to look at her, which I don't blame her. Like,
that's weird.
That's a lot of money, but awkward. So
apparently not back then, but
yeah, I mean, that might have been general entertainment, I guess. So on December 13th, the Countess actually sent for Maria. Now, this is kind of strange. So it sounds like the Countess sent for Maria to take her to the country, kind of get away, have a little bit of a vacation. But the Countess didn't tell anyone, including Maria's family. And this could have been because maybe she didn't want the press and the media following them. It was really crazy after the trial. The press would be outside of Maria's door trying to talk to her. So maybe the Countess thought, well, I'm just going to get her away for a couple of days and not tell anybody so the press doesn't come. I don't know.
Don't you think the family would miss her?
That's exactly. That's where it's strange for me is why don't you tell the family at least? So Maria, now they did know that she was going somewhere with the Countess, but didn't know where it was. And they actually just thought that it was a day outing. But it turns out that she took Maria for a 2-day retreat in the country. So, like I said earlier, the newspapers were coming to the Barbella home to interview Maria, but her family was like, we don't know. We don't know where she's at or when she's coming back. So if you see her, let us know. It was kind of a strange situation.
Right.
And when Maria got back, it turns out that Maria, she didn't really want to go. Maria said, I just really wanted to be home and spend time with my family, but that would be kind of a hard situation. After the trial, it was pretty chaotic for Maria, and her name actually landed back in the papers on December 31st, 1896. But this time it was for saving a life.
Oh.
So that's good.
Now we're going the opposite.
Now we're going the other way. So a woman who lived in the same apartment building as her accidentally caught herself on fire. Apparently a kerosene lamp broke and this woman got some kerosene on her apron. And when she walked over to her stove, the apron caught on fire and the woman ran out of her apartment. And when Maria saw her, Maria grabbed a blanket and wrapped the woman in it. And then Maria ran and got olive oil to apply to the woman's burns. But unfortunately, the woman was burned so badly that she wasn't expected to live.
Well, she tried.
She did. She definitely tried. It's just, you're not even a month out of your trial and you're back in the papers again.
Yeah, your life is flip-flopping again.
Exactly. So in February of 1897, Maria and the Countess, they were both invited to a ball being held by the George Washington Italian Association. And this Italian association was one of the groups that tried to help Maria in her trials. However, neither Maria or the Countess were able to make it, but Maria wrote a letter expressing her gratitude and that she couldn't make it because she had just started working again and needed to keep her job to support her family.
Yeah, that's too bad they couldn't make it.
I
Or
know.
At least her.
At least her, yeah. Maybe because the Countess couldn't go, she didn't feel comfortable going. So after this, Maria's life seemed to return to normal for a while. She even met a man who she fell in love with, and his name was Francisco Paulo Bruno, and the two married on November 4th, 1897.
Oh, so just
About a year later.
Close to a year.
So Bruno had only been in America for about 2 months and was working as a barber. But before coming to America, he was a soldier in the Italian army. And the couple met through friends, and after 2 weeks of knowing each other, they were engaged. And the couple wanted to open up their own barbershop. And this is what the Buffalo Times had to say about that. So this is, oh man.
Yeah, I just read the headline.
Did you just read the headline? So the headline reads, Maria Barberi's Razor. Maria Barberi has married an Italian barber, and they are going to set up a little shop of their own in Brooklyn. When Maria is brushing the lather over her customers' faces and scraping their chins with her razor, she can make them feel comfortable by telling them how she once severed with a good sharp razor the jugular vein of one Demencio Cataldo.
Wow.
And that's the whole article. The papers back in the 1800s, man. After their wedding, Maria, she actually started attending court trials. She visited a woman in jail who was on trial for murdering her husband. And she also attended the trial of a man who was accused of murdering another man. And it almost felt like she had a fascination with it. Like she couldn't let it go. She would even comment to reporters about the evidence being shown and how she could imagine herself back in that spot again.
Maybe she was trying to take the spot of the Countess, how she helped her out.
Could be.
Trying to help other people out. But
yeah.
I see where you're going with that fascination of it.
Yeah, she even took her husband to Scene to show him where she used to live. Now, 1898, it was a rough year for Maria and Francesco. On March 11th, 1898, Maria had just got done cooking dinner for her husband when she heard a strange noise at the front door. So she went to the living room and she saw a woman enter the door holding a knife. And this woman came after Maria and yelled, "I'll give you what you gave your lover." So she's obviously talking about Maria killing Demencio. And Maria screamed and just passed out, and her husband came running out and saw the woman running out the front door. So this woman was a Miss Romano, and she lived with Maria and Francesco for a period of time. But after 2 months of her not paying rent, Maria evicted her. So this was what the woman was upset about. And then on November 30th, 1898, Maria gave birth to their first child, a little boy. But sadly, he only lived a few minutes after being born. But the couple, they would go on to have 5 children together. So it gets really crazy. On December 31st, 1898, Francesco, he was actually arrested when he attacked a police officer and 2 other barbers with a razor.
Oh boy, here we go.
I know. It's like, oh, way to just feed the media there, Francesco. Gosh. And so razors are just not a good thing in this family. Like let's not open up a barbershop.
Yeah.
But I guess the story goes that Francesco was working for a barber and he either quit or was fired. Regardless, though, Francisco went back to the barbershop to retrieve his own razors and other personal belongings. And when Francisco went in to get his possessions, he just walked in and grabbed the razors. Well, one of the other barbers thought that he was trying to steal the razors and a confrontation broke out. Well, a police officer was actually in the barber's chair and he jumped in and tried to break up the confrontation, and that's when things really escalated. So it wasn't like he was deliberately going out trying to kill somebody. So, and Francisco was arrested and held on a $500 bail, but I never found anything else on this. So either the charges were dropped or he served a short sentence, I'm not sure. But after 1898, things seemed to settle down for Maria and Francesco, at least according to the newspapers. But on January 15th, 1901, the mutilated body of Meyer Weisbard was found in a trunk on a pier near New York City, and Meyer's throat had been cut. So Meyer was a jewelry salesman who lived in New York with his wife and 3 kids. And one of the first suspects that the police started investigating was an Italian man, Joseph Favario, who was a customer of Meyer. And this is how our Maria gets involved in the case.
Oh, wow.
So the New York Evening Journal employed Maria to help find the person who murdered Meyer. Now, she actually wasn't getting paid, but she was working on the paper's behalf, and if she helped solve the murder, she could get a $1,500 reward, which today is about $56,000. And I think because the suspect was Italian and Maria could communicate with the Italian community was one of the main reasons she was involved. And the papers knew Maria. They talked about her all the time. So Maria's first task was to go to the police station and look at all the evidence. And this is so funny to me because she's just some random person off the street.
I was going to say, they just let anybody come in and look at all the evidence.
The captain of the police took her to the evidence room, if they even had an evidence room, and showed her everything. It's just so insane. So the evidence she looked at, she looked at the trunk, an apron, and a few other clues. And she told the police that she knew the trunk was the property of an Italian. She said that the green color and the manufacturing is something an Italian would own and something that she has seen in the Italian headquarters. And I guess she said that when she was examining the trunk and stuff, she said that she looked at the police officers and they were kind of smiling at her. And she told the papers later something along the lines of, I knew they thought that I didn't really know what I was doing and they had already looked at it. But she said something like, but I'm an Italian. I know what to look for if you're looking for an Italian suspect. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, a green trunk.
I know, right? It's weird, yeah. When she examined the apron that was found at the crime scene, she said the pattern is something that many Italians would have, and she also said the apron was a very big apron, so the woman who owned it must have been very fat. And after looking at the evidence, she told the detectives that she was headed to the Italian quarters to talk to the Italian women. She said, women talking to women is best, which I can see that, especially an Italian woman, because there is probably that language barrier. I mean, it's 1901.
Back then.
Exactly. So she also said that she would go to the shops to see if she could find out who sold green trunks like that. And within a couple of days, Maria talked to over 40 women about Meyer. So she was definitely going for it. Yeah. Maybe she was just like a true crime fan, maybe if she lived in today's age, she would have been a detective or something, or a journalist. You never know.
That's true.
So on January 25th, 1901, Maria reported to the New York Evening Journal, and I'm just going to read what she reported. So the headline says, Maria Barberi resumes the search, does not believe Weisbard was killed by Italians. She said, I think the man was not killed by a customer. A customer would have his name upon the books of the jewelry firm, and so would be afraid of discovery. I think Weisbard was decoyed into some tenement by people who saw his jewelry and made him believe they were going to buy from him. Probably a whole family took part in the murder. Husband, wife, and a brother. They took his jewelry and then placed the body in the trunk. The woman washing up the blood from the floor. I do not think the murder was done by Italians. Italians stab, they never cut. Maria, you cut Demencio's throat. But moving on, I should not be surprised to learn that Meyer was killed by one or more of his own race. There are thousands of peddlers on the east side. Weisbard may have been killed by one of his jealous rivals. I have found that Weisbard had 3 men arrested 3 years ago. Why do the police not give me the names of those men? If I knew who they were, I could go to their homes and talk with their wives. I might discover some motive. From my heart, I pity Miss Weisbard and her children. They are poor and in sorrow. The trouble is that the dead man never told his family enough about his business. If he had told them about his enemies, the task of finding his murderer would perhaps be easier. So that's what Maria had to say about it. Now, I kind of agree with her about the, let's talk to those 3 men who he had arrested before. There could be, some bad blood there. And the customer saying...
being robbed.
Just being robbed, exactly. It kind of makes sense. Now, unfortunately, this murder case would remain unsolved. So as hard as Maria tried, she was not able to solve the case. And this murder has never been solved.
Oh, wow. Wonder if they ever did go talk to those 3 guys.
Maybe they did and they just didn't tell Maria, hopefully they did. I mean, it would make sense. So the same year that Maria was working on the murder case, her husband Francesco decided to go back to Italy to visit his family. Well, while he was there, he was actually arrested for an unpaid debt and thrown in jail in Italy. So he wasn't able to come back and work. And this left Maria and her kids in quite a financial bind.
Oh, that's right, because they have 5 kids.
They have 5 kids, exactly. So, however, at some point, Francesco, he got out of jail in Italy, but instead of coming back to America, he went on to marry another woman in Italy. So
I wonder how long he was in jail.
I know. I don't know. So not only does he marry her, but then he has the nerve to bring her to America with him and move her into his and Maria's home.
What?
Yeah, I guess he just thought that Maria would be okay with this. Like, hey, I brought another wife. So Maria, needless to say, was not okay with this and filed for divorce. She filed due to abandonment. And, once again, she finds herself in court. And now the police, they actually arrested Francesco for, is it polygamy? When you have more than one wife? Luckily, though, Maria, she was granted her divorce and was able to move on from that crazy situation. Now, sometime after her divorce from Francesco, Maria married another man, and his name was Michael Di Chiaro. Unfortunately, though, he was a really violent man, and he would beat Maria often.
Oh, boy.
So, I know. And so Maria, she went to divorce court and was granted a divorce from him as well. Now, this is where it's a little confusing for me because I found where she does end up marrying again. She marries an Albert Biagini and they have a daughter together. And I believe that they stayed together, but I'm not 100% sure. And the reason I say this is because Maria is buried and on her tombstone, it says Maria Di Chiaro. So she has that man who beat her really bad. That's the name on there. So maybe I have the timeline messed up. Maybe she didn't really marry Alberto Biagini. Maybe they just were together.
So that's marriage 3, right?
Yes, marriage 3 if she ends up marrying Alberto. So in 1925, Maria found herself back in the courtroom, but this time she was the worried mother sitting in the courtroom while her son Michael was on trial. Uh-oh. This poor family. So Michael, he was charged with carrying a deadly weapon. He was carrying a blackjack. And a blackjack is like a heavy leather pouch. I think we've talked about that in one of the other episodes. It's like 8 to 12 inches long and can be filled with lead.
Yeah, that was the City Park guy.
Yes, yeah. George Noche.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's right. I couldn't remember. I knew we talked about it, but so Maria, she would actually take the stand as a character witness for her son. And when the attorneys asked her what kind of a son Michael was, she said, quote, "He is a God-fearing lad who spends his nights with me and was always home with me." Now, her son was ultimately acquitted of the charges, and the paper reported that when the verdict came back not guilty, Maria just stood up, went to her son, took him by the arm, and led him out of the courtroom. She was probably like, I am so over this. Like, let's go home.
So he didn't do anything except for he was carrying that weapon.
Carrying a deadly weapon. I did see in one article that I think he had been in trouble in the past, so he wasn't supposed to have any weapons on him. So I think that was the situation. But after this, there isn't really anything about Maria in the papers that I could find. So I'm hoping life settled down for her and she could live a peaceful life.
Yeah, she's had quite the whirlwind.
Oh my gosh, she has lived a lot. And she actually passed away on March 24th, 1950, and she's buried at the 1st Cavalry Cemetery in New York. But before we end the episode, I want to talk a little bit about the Countess, because it's kind of she kind of has a fascinating story. So in the 1990s, the Countess's great-granddaughter, Idonna Pucci, she was going through some family belongings / heirlooms, and she ran across a small book that belonged to the Countess. And this book actually outlined the entire ordeal with Maria.
Oh, wow.
So one quote that came out of this booklet was when the Countess found out that Maria was arrested. Apparently, the Countess told her husband, quote, "A woman does not kill lightly. It is not in her nature." But after finding this book, Idonna, she went on to write 2 books about Maria and the Countess. And those books are The Lady of Sing Sing, An American Countess, An Italian Immigrant, and Their Epic Battle for Justice in New York's Gilded Age. And the other book is called The Trials of Maria Barbella.
Oh, wow. And this was 1990.
Yeah, and it was the Countess's great-granddaughters. But how cool. Like, could you imagine finding that and then digging through? And I guess Idonna spent like months and months just digging through court trials, notes and stuff. So
to write those books.
To write those 2 books.
Wow.
Pretty cool. Now, for the Countess, she spent her later years continuing her work for the poor and giving to charity and stuff, and advocating for social causes. However, the political turmoil of the early 20th century, including World War II and the rise of fascism in Italy, it really affected the Countess significantly. She died in 1944 during World War II, and some sources suggest that she passed away under difficult circumstances, possibly due to hardships and dangers of the war. I did see where she had to be checked into a mental hospital because she suffered from a lot of mental illness due to kind of everything. So,
well, that was her whole life, going through people's horrible stories and trying to help them out.
Exactly. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting about the Countess and how her great-granddaughter found all of that.
And it's not that long ago, 1990.
1990.
Well, that was when she found them.
Exactly.
So it probably took her a while to write those 2 books.
Oh, I'm sure it probably took her. Well, the one book was published in 2020. The other book was published, I think, in 96 or 97. Oh. So, it probably took her years to complete all that. But that is the wild story of Maria Barbella.
And it was a wild one. It was really interesting, though.
It was so much history there. Not only Italian-American history, but just American history. Right. I mean, looking at Sing Sing and the way that the trials were put together, it was a fascinating story. So, but we'll post pictures on all of our social media. Please subscribe, rate, follow our podcast. And we hope you enjoyed listening to the story of Maria Barbella, and we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.